This is Chapter 3, Section 3, The Cattle Kingdom. So cattle, meaning cows, they actually aren't native species to North America. It's not like there was wild cows just roaming North America. Uh, there was bison, that was the closest thing that we had to cows, but they were actually brought here by the Spanish and European explorers during the 1500s. Originally, the Spanish brought them over in the Southwest. Stray cattle, any kind of farm animal, some of them get break out, what have you. But there was stray cattle from the Spanish, and they became wild, and they populated, and they kind of roamed the Great Plains. It was perfect for cows because it had plenty of grassland to eat. So they were just kind of wandering around, and they populated very quickly. Early cows, they didn't kind of look like the dairy cattle that you kind of think of the black and white and everything like that. They kind of more look like this guy right here, like a Texas Longhorn. Um, and many of the farmers, original farmers, just had an open range where they just had a great big uh, land that was unfenced in, and they're kind of, the cows that kind of inhabited that area that was kind of theirs. But they would kind of roam and not be fenced in like a modern farm. Uh, what they pretty much have now, it's called a ranch, which is that large farm I'm talking about with the fences. There is plenty of land, just thousands of acres, but there is a fence, so they know exactly how many they have and how many they should have. Um, but that's the start of all this. The whole cowboy culture is having these ranches and having a set amount of cattle that they have. So these early ranch owners didn't really have a meaning to transport their beef cattle to where it would sell. They live in these remote areas and they have thousands of head of cattle, but they needed to get them to, cities where they could sell off all those beef cattle. So this is where the railroads came into play. Cities in the eastern United States did have a high demand for this protein-rich beef. Uh, still today there's high demand for beef, but people started making more money and they can afford this luxury of beef. So once these railroads connected to states such as Texas and Oklahoma, where these ranches were, they were able to ship their cattle to these eastern cities and make a large profit. Now, getting these cows to the railroad station was a chore. So ranchers began herding these cows to be loaded on these trains. So they have to gather them all up on the thousand from like all the parts of Thousand Acre Ranch, gather them all up together, and then you have to move them out to where the railroad track is, railroad station, to be loaded on the train cars and headed back east. Now, they had hired someone to do this, transporting these cows all these thousands of miles. Or one rancher couldn't do it alone. These ranchers hired these cowhands, cowboys. Now you think of these skilled horseback riders that could lead and round up cattle, as you can see here. Was not an easy job. They went on these cattle drives, which is the herding and moving of these cattle over long distances. This is your stereotypical cowboy. You got the spurs, horseback riding, got the long, big hat, and you're moving these cattle across great swaths of land, for thousands of miles. Some, were over thousands of miles, and it sometimes would take 2 to 3 months to get a whole herd. Talking about thousands of heads of cattle to the train station. So these cattle drives were not easy. You were going long distances, and they were going through rivers, swamps, stretches of dry land with little water for the cows. Cows were getting sick. It just wasn't easy. There wasn't like they had to sleep under the stars pretty much. They couldn't take a whole lot with them. They had to stay light. Um, there were risk of something spooking, like a strike of lightning, spooking the cows. They could stampede or run away in all directions, and you had to wrangle them again. Just keeping them all together would be a job on its own. They were, it's a big group of cows, the herd. It's not like they were, they weren't hard to miss pretty much. So thieves and Native Americans would see them, and steal from them, maybe steal a few head of cattle. So they always had to be on the lookout for that. That's why these cowboys, they always had guns with them. They were not, unfortunately, they were not paid well, and they made less than $1 a day most times. And rode 18 hours a day in the saddle was no, cowboys were no stranger to that. That's a long time to be in the saddle. That's why sometimes when you see like a cowboy in a cartoon, they kind of get off the horse or kind of walking bow-legged. Like, that's a long time to be on a horse. So these American cowhands and cowboys, they received actually the knowledge of this from the Spanish and Mexicans. They were called vaqueros, which just means cowboy in Spanish. These Mexican ranchers really first developed this practice, how to herd, how to rope, how to brand cattle. It was all from the vaqueros. They kind of started this. And really even like the cowboy hat, is really just a version of sombrero. When you're out in the sun all the time, you need something to shield your face. And so the Mexicans kind of have the sombrero, and then you have the modern day cowboy hat. Does the same thing, shades your face in the sun, from the sun. So once the cattle drive was over, there was usually a nice town to go rest after the long cattle drive by the railroad station. These were called cow towns. These settlements, at the end of the cattle trail. And they had everything for the cowboys to relax and unwind after a long cattle drive. Just a saloon, a hotel, restaurants to feed them, entertain the cowboys after a long cattle drive. This is your stereotypical, this is, Cowtown. It had everything that they wanted that you see in westerns and everything like that. It was sometimes an unruly place because you have all these hardened cowboys coming in all tired, looking for some entertainment, looking for a good time. A lot of drinking was involved, and sometimes gunfights would happen. So this leads to why it was called the Wild West. So these cow towns were known to have gunfights, like I said, and cowboys would have a little bit too much to drink, and at the saloons, and then fist fights and gunfights would happen. Everybody's kind of seen this in Western movies. Dodge City, Kansas was probably one of the most famous cow town, and it was known for its lawless activities and famous gunfights. And so it got so bad that some cow towns started banning guns from entering the town limits because of the gunfights. So as soon as you walk up to the town, you have to check in your gun, walk in, because it was just a precaution. Because once you get drunk in a saloon, stuff happens. Now, was it as bad as the movies and everything really depict? No, not really. But it did happen. There were some famous cowboys. And outlaws that went through these towns. So really the height of the cattle ranching industry was from 1860 to 1880s. Profits were extremely high. This was great for cowboys and ranchers. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it. At one point, there was actually 7 million cattle roaming through these open ranches. It was actually getting so much, everybody wanted to get in there, their hand at it, that it was more than the grasslands could feed. There's just too many cows. But it's every good thing. It kind of comes to an end. The expanding rail lines, into these smaller remote areas allowed for the cattle drives to be less and less time, and really you didn't really need a cattle drive at all. It was so close you could send, just a few cows, not as much as at one time. The whole point of the cattle drive is that, you're not going to make a million trips back and forth, but if the rail line's closer, you can go once a week and drop off your cows. an economic depression also kind of hit in the 1880s, and the demand for beef kind of decreased because if you didn't have a lot of money, you weren't going to be buying the higher grade beef because beef was expensive, and so the demand for it just went down. So also this new farmland meant less area for the cattle. Like these ranches were massive, and so these farmers needed a lot of land for growing their crops. So it kind of uh, hurt in the cattle drives because you can't cattle drive through some farmers' fields and everything like that. So that kind of ended the whole cowboy cattle drive um, system. But the cowboy culture is still living strong. It's just part of American culture. If you ask a foreigner, a lot of times they think Americans are kind of look like cowboys. Like that's the American look. The boots, hats, the cowboy hat, the jeans, kind of how we got here. And it's still a popular look today. And just like the cowboy culture, just there's so many books and movies and TV shows have depicted it. Especially like 1950s, 1960s was really big in the Wild West. As you see here, we got John Wayne. Everybody knows who John Wayne, famous actor who played a lot of cowboy roles. Same with Clint Eastwood. And then you have the Lone Ranger, which was really popular. And so this culture just kind of is still around today, even in country music. You see, cowboy hats, the boots, and everything like that. So the influence of these cowboys from this time really has had an impact even today in American culture. So these cowboy skills have not died off. We call them rodeos now, which is a contest where cowboys, compete at riding with, doing what the cowboys did, riding wild horses, roping calves, barrel racing. You got to be a good rider. This is all like the skills that the cowboys used to have to get their job done, and now we kind of made it into a competition. These modern rodeos derive from everything, being a cowboy, and so that cowboy culture is still very alive today.